Today's sponsor of Southern Sense is Audible.com, a leading provider of spoken audible entertainment and information. Listen to audiobooks whenever and wherever you want. Get a free book when you sign up for a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Southern Sense.
If you find yourself in trouble, count on me, my friend. I'll get right up in trouble's face. You won't see him again. I've got the backbone, American. I've got the heart, American. I've got the will, American. Will you stand up, don't sit down. Stand up, don't back down. Stand up, shout it out. Stand up, let's make it loud. American, American.
Welcome to another exciting show with Southern Sense on Blog Talk Radio. So turn up the volume and enter our chat room or grab your phones. Call in and join the conversation. Help us to restore the republic to this country and inspire the majority to be silent no longer.
Well, look me straight in the eye. Tell me what you see. I'll tell the truth every time. Yes, you can count on me. I've got the backbone, American. I've got the heart, American. I've got the will, American. Will you stand up, don't sit down. Stand up, don't back down. Stand up and shout it out. Stand up, let's make it loud. American, 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 American.
Welcome to a special broadcast of Southern Sense here on Blog Talk Radio, Pundit Press, and you'll find us also up on SHR Media. You'll find us listed as one of the top 100 conservative shows on TopTalkRadio.com and everywhere else. I forget. Just go to southern-sense.com and click on the radio tab, and you'll find Southern Sense where it's broadcasted all over the place. I'm your hostess with the mostest, the radio chick, Annie, along with my the deep and straight doesn't care. All right. You know this is a special broadcast. I can't talk for a hill of beans. Co-host Dan the Butcher of Pundit Press. Danny boy.
I got to tell you.
How they head basket fast.
Oh, you know what? I got to tell you, Andy, you almost caught me today because anybody who listens knows that I always mute myself during the intro because I sing along to the theme song, and so I'm just singing away. I mean, just as loud as can be, and I look over in a breath, and Annie has unmuted me, so she almost caught me today.
I got to do that to you one day just to get even. Oh, man. Well, people are not accustomed to us broadcasting on Saturday. We always broadcast Tuesdays and Fridays. But this guest was special, and I felt that it was necessary to do a special broadcast to get her story out. And we're going to bring her on in just a moment. And you know that we always dedicate the show to a fallen hero. But because today's broadcast is different and it's special, today's dedication is going to go to all of the victims of emotional, physical, domestic, sexual, and child abuse. The silent people out there that are behind the scenes that we don't hear about. So today's dedication is going to go out to them. And I I don't even know if there's a song or anything that I could play to do them justice. I really honestly don't know. And I would say our best dedication music would be Susan Tom's Take My Hand. And I will dedicate the show using that. So we'll be back in a few minutes after the song dedication. Susan Tom's, and this is Take My Hand. Hi, that's Susan Tom's Take My Hand. And you're back. We're listening to Southern Sense on Blog Talk Radio, Pundit Press, SHR Media, and half a dozen other outlets. And you can find us at Southern-Sense. Click on the radio tab. Danny Boy, we're back, and let's bring aboard our guest, Dawn Stefanowicz. I knew I was going to mess that up.
Stefanowicz.
And you know, I worked in Bushwick, Williamsburg, and Brooklyn, and we had a large Polish section, and I never had a problem with saying something like Pivovarczyk, but I can't say your name. Dawn, welcome aboard. I'm sorry I'm mutilating your name.
Thank you, Annie and Dan, for having me. My last name is said Stefanowicz or Stefanowicz, however you'd like.
Stefanowicz. I got it.
Okay.
You know, the funny part is that when I worked in Brooklyn, the joke is that if you can spell the last name of Pivovarczyk, you've been in the precinct too long. So we're a little wacky here. So just bear with us. We're not accustomed to Saturdays, but welcome aboard to Southern Sense, and it's our pleasure. Recently, you know, I had never heard of you or heard about your book, but the Heritage Foundation decided to send around these emails and postings, and it featured an article that you recently wrote, and it was in the Daily Signal as well as half a dozen other places, and it was titled, "My Father Was Gay, Why I Opposed Legalized Same-Sex Marriage." And I finished reading your book last night, and I know I texted you as I was about 70% through it. I was crying. You had me in tears.
Oh, wow.
It is.
It's
that powerful.
It's a very moving story, and there are so many children out there that have grown up in a homosexual household, and the majority of us were raised in, in a situation where there was quite a bit of instability, and that would be for about 98% of us, where there are different partners that will come into the home, and they don't stay too long, but they do. There are different ones that will come in and out, and there often is a higher risk of sexual abuse, and we as children will deal with, sometimes it's post-traumatic stress disorder. We will deal with nightmares, depression, suicidal ideation. That can be quite common if we've gone through a fair bit of trauma and sexual abuse.
Now, you have a very interesting situation where both your parents also came from abusive relationships.
Yes.
And
my father grew up in an alcoholic household, and he was sexually abused as a child and as a teenager by older male relatives. And that included the fact that he had been sodomized over 100 times. And he told me this 11 months before he died of AIDS, that he had been so severely sexually abused. But he also assured me that he wanted me no matter what. He wanted his children, and, that was very important to him. But it meant that my mother was treated like a surrogate. She was basically used to create children, and then there were no sexual relations between my parents. By the time my twin brother and I were about 2.5 years old, my parents were having no more sex. And so there had already been a male partner living in our home, beginning when my twin brother and I were 10 months old.
Yeah, and you also have a younger brother too, right?
Yes.
Right. So now the three of you were growing up in this household, and your mother was someone that she didn't lead; she was led, which made you end up acting as the adult in the house, right?
Yes. She was very passive. She had come into the marriage with a big secret, and my father had come into the marriage with a big secret. For my mother, she had a severe health condition, which meant that she could very quickly go into a comatose situation due to very brittle, very fragile diabetes. And my father came into the marriage with his secret about his homosexuality.
Man, that is one heck of a household. As I said, I was reading the book. The book is called Out From Under. It's on your website, Dawn Stefanowicz. See, I knew I was going to do that today. Stefanowicz.org. There's a link up in the chat room Dan has been posting for the book, and there's also a link on the show page. So people listening into the podcast later on can also click on it and find out your story and get your book. But at a very young age, you were having dreams of abuse, and was it dreams or was it reality?
I had nightmares for about 7 years. I hardly spoke to anyone because I had a very severe speech impediment. I stuttered so badly that it was extremely difficult to get out the first word, the first sentence. And so people basically thought, I was just this very shy, withdrawn child. That I was also very passive. I wasn't an aggressive child. I was very gentle, kind. But because of that passivity and how withdrawn I was, I think there was an assumption that my father could just tell me what to do and I would do it. And it was pretty much like that during my childhood. But you would not have known about the nightmares because I wasn't talking about it. My twin brother and I had similar dreams, which we shared with each other in one of our last baths together. We were likely about 8 years old, and just due to the fact that we were, filthy dirty from being, playing around outside, we were both taking this bath together, and we leaned over and whispered into each other's ears the kinds of dreams we'd been having.
Wow. Now, as twins, you had a special speak that only the two of you understood.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the interesting things, we were part of twin studies in the 1960s with the Toronto University here in Canada. And as part of that study, they were studying twins as, these are fraternal twins. We're obviously not identical. He's a boy and I'm a girl. But we did have a twin speak. We had a way of understanding one another, and where I would know if he was cold and I would go grab a blanket and cover him. I would know when he was feeling a certain way. But he also had a sense of my feelings, and he would speak up for me verbally. He would express what I was feeling, and other people may not have understood what we were saying when we were 2 and 3 years old because of our own twin language. And, of course, there was a lot of gesturing and body language that went along with that as little children. And so, he and I were witnesses, in this situation, but he has not chosen to go public or talk about it. I'm the only one that does talk about it. But he is my other half that is a witness.
Are you two still close?
We have been distanced because of the situation that we grew up in. It's not uncommon for siblings to go their separate ways because of the various trauma, the losses, the grief in our situation growing up in a homosexual household, and also the fact that we often will lose intergenerational supports from other relatives who may be very cautious about coming around into our situation. So there's a lot of losses for us lifelong. And the other thing is, I live in Canada, and they're so politically correct here, and we have laws in place so that we can't speak, write, blog, text, even email, anything that would be considered hurtful to the feelings of someone that would be protected under the term of sexual orientation or gender identity. So it makes it enormously difficult to have any kind of post-secondary education, profession, business, or be in a job situation where you are bound by these kinds of, newspeak, political correct speech, where you can't talk about it. So it's very, very difficult even for us as siblings. I have a younger brother, and I have spoken with him in the last few years, but it is enormously difficult to even talk about what we went through growing up.
All right, well, we have a question in the chat room from Michelle. She wants to know if your twin is comfortable with you speaking about this, going public.
I do express in the book that when I addressed the Senate Committee of Legal and Constitutional Affairs on hate crime legislation in Canada, this is back in 2004, my twin brother did express support for me speaking at the Senate, and he wanted to make sure that the senators understood the importance of children having both a father and a mother in their lives, a father and mother who are married to one another and are known by the children, and the children are being raised by their biological parents. How enormously important that is to children's development.
All right, well, you had that in your house, and you still had a lot of problems. It was an extremely liberal household where almost there was no bounds sexually.
There were very few boundaries when it came to sexuality and gender. My father was actually encouraging me to stretch the boundaries around my gender when I was about 8-9 years of age. Now, he was very much enamored by Craig Russell, a female impersonator who, he could act and he could sing, and he would dramatize out different movie stars, famous Hollywood actresses and so forth, from earlier on. He did a fabulous Mae West. But anyway, my father was very much enamored with him, and he had spoken to me and said, Dawn, you can change your appearance. You can wear masculine cologne. There's things you can do so that you're not limited to how you come across gender-wise. He began taking us to this is off Toronto Island at one point. It's called Helen's Point, and it's known today as a clothing optional beach. It was made that way by City Council. However, back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it was well known as the Gay Nude Beach. And so that would be where men would go over on the ferry boat from the harbor, the Toronto harbor, right across to the island, and they could meet, they could cruise, they could socialize or whatever. So it was that was an interesting experience when you're a child about 8 or 9 years of age and you're in that kind of setting. My father had also taken me to Canada's first sex shop, which was right downtown Toronto, called Lovecraft, and I describe that a bit in my book, Out From Under. And just the kinds of objects and lotions and oils that they had in that shop, I picked up a long dildo, and I had no idea what that was and how it was used. And my dad had noticed that, I guess, someone at the cashier register had noticed, and he said, Dawn, you got to put that down. Anyway, he had taken me into that shop a number of times, and he had also taken us on interesting vacations along the East Coast, going into the U.S., down into Florida, and he cruised in Miami and Fort Lauderdale areas. He liked those especially for vacations.
Wow, and here you are, a young child. You're not sexually developed. Your brain and your body haven't even adjusted to the fact that, you're going to be entering puberty in a few years. But this was happening even before you even thought about sexuality.
Well, there's a lot of expressed sexuality. There's nudity, the language that is used. It's, it's almost open. You'd think, well, it's just an open environment. But it's extremely confusing to me as a child because, first of all, I'm not feeling that I'm as important as the men my father has in his life. And I'm feeling very devalued as a little girl. I'm not feeling that my femininity and my developing womanhood is being valued and seen as important. I don't feel loved. I feel absolutely stunted and demoralized. And I actually became... I tended to become more of a tomboy, which was really opposite from what my body was doing as I entered my teens and I was developing and boys were starting to notice me. But I did not feel safe to be truly feminine and to really enjoy my girlhood, my developing womanhood. I really felt that I was not protected in my environment.
Yeah, there's comments going up in the chat room left and right, unbelievable. Your parents didn't have parenting skills. Your need for simply just a hug was not met.
That's right.
All children need to be hugged.
Thing that I was dealing with. My mom was, you have to understand, this was a situation where family law in Canada at the time did not give women financial assets, financial supports if they left their husband. And so this, in the time, in the 1970s, a lot of women stayed in bad marriages. And there just was not support for women. If they left their husbands, the assets were not split down the middle. They were left with nothing. And they often would have the children, but they would be just in sheer poverty. And women still are today, but at least, certain laws, you have to understand, if you're in a very abusive situation and it's violent, there needs to be recourse for the protection of the person who's being abused, and if children are involved, the children are protected and are in a safe environment. But my mother was also involved in a same-sex relationship with a woman from work, and so I actually had two parents that were involved in same-sex relationships. I do concentrate on my father because my mother's was just a season of her life. I think she was going through a fair bit of confusion. She was very hurt, very lonely, and I think there are women out there that get so downcast and feel so alone. My mother did not have very many friends. My father had made sure to ruin her two best friendships, had sent them nasty letters threatening them. And so it's just very, very difficult for my mother. And so, they were both not good parents, and I understand that my mother had severe health conditions. But I've noticed that, when I go back and I look over my life, my father was actually, he could not have married a strong, independent woman. He didn't like strong women. He had an animosity towards women who stood up and spoke up, had a voice. And, there's a sense of equality in real man-woman marriages that was missing in my parents' marriage, because from the get-go, my father had already had homosexual relationships before he married. He married my mom and continued those homosexual relationships. But the product of the relationship was the fact he had 3 children.
Wow. I was as I was reading the book, trying to understand how it was to live under that stress and strain that the 3 of you went through. It's amazing that you were able to survive. And as I said, you had me crying. And my question would be then is, why would we allow gay couples to have children, having known what is possible? How do we prevent another situation like this?
Well, you have to look at it that when you look at the research, it's very hard for researchers to even analyze our types of households. And the reason for that is we have a number of factors. We have varied family forms, various living arrangements, and imposing cultural values that play a havoc on us as children. Our home environments are unique. They're quite unstable. And these characteristics, the fact you can have different partners coming in and out of the household, you can have one or more genders represented in your household. You could have biological parent or biological parents. You could have legal parents, guardians, foster, adoptive parents, and parent sexual partners that are ex-partners and current partners. and new partners, and you can also have different residences. Now, I'm not saying, every single situation is like this, but I have to say that when they've done research, what they found for us as children is that only 1 out of 17 of us children of gays actually grow up in a household where our parent is partnered with another partner right at this point during the research, and they both live in the same house. So only 1 out of 17 of us have that. Now, if you want to look at the number of us that are children of gays that grow up in an environment where our parent is partnered with one partner from the time we're a very young child to the point of 18 years of age, that's around 2% of us. So only 2% of us have what you would consider a stable household environment to grow up in. 98% of us do not. And the majority of us are conceived, obviously, heterosexually through men and women having sex, which are our biological parents, but, through whether it's cohabitation, separation, divorce, single parenting, remarriage, step parenting, foster care, adoption, or the access that adults can have to reproductive technologies and surrogacy, we eventually grow up or end up in a same-sex parented household. Now, in my situation, my twin brother and I began to live in a homosexual household where the only kind of sex that was going on was homosexual, was same-sex, beginning at 10 months old. I know that sounds bizarre, but it started for us in our infancy, so we didn't know any different. This was normal for us. There was a fair bit of instability. There was a lot of insecurity. I didn't know when my father would next bring another partner into the home, how long he would be there, what I would find them doing, or what I would see them doing or hear them doing. And, my father experimented with all forms of sexuality. Under the GLBT umbrella, there's it's open-ended for sexual preferences. You could say you're gay. Now, it doesn't mean that you won't ever have sex with a woman or a man. What it means is right now, at this moment, you consider yourself gay. And so there's a very broad understanding of sexuality. When Lohman, a researcher, looked at sexuality in America, and he looked at several million Americans, what he found was that the majority of men and women who say they're gay or lesbian have had and will have opposite sex sexual partners. And so this whole idea of being gay or lesbian and it being fixed is not the reality. And I've heard from so many adult children where they say, my mom was in a lesbian relationship, but then she had a boyfriend beforehand, she had a boyfriend after, or then she had another lesbian relationship and that didn't work out. And then then she, sometimes what will happen, the parent will eventually marry another partner of the opposite sex. So you'll have a swinging back and forth in relationships, and that is a lot of instability for children because it's all about adult desires. It's not about children's needs. Children need very stable, secure home environments. And I'm not saying every heterosexual situation is perfect, but, when a man and a woman come together in marriage, they're not cohabiting before marriage, they get married, they're more likely to remain married than the couple that cohabit before marriage. The other thing that really makes a significant difference in the research is if they go to church once a week or they go to synagogue once a week, just the fact that they are in a religious community that they attend at least once a week, that immediately creates a more stable marriage. Again, doesn't make it perfect, but it creates more stability for the child. And when we, look at same-sex relationships and the level of instability, they found among lesbians that get married, they have a much higher divorce rate. For men who get married, there was an interesting article that came out in the New York Times several years back, and it said within the first year, 50% of men who marry other men, they open up their relationship to other sexual partners. That's within the first year, and that's the research. Women tend to be more emotional in their relationships, and men tend to be more sexual. No, but that doesn't mean, that one is excluding the emotion, the other is excluding sex. I'm just saying that men tend to be highly sexually impulsive, and in a marriage situation where you have man and woman married, we as women, and the fact that there are children, we restrain men's sexuality. We are, as women, we are equal, we're complementary, but we're uniquely different. We provide for children's needs that a man cannot provide. I mean, we carry children in our womb, we breastfeed, we nurture our children in a way that's so different. Men are incredible at creating lifelong security and identity in children. And, if you look at the longing of children, they have an intrinsic longing to know and be raised by their biological father and mother.
Well, we got Dan wants to ask a question. Jump in, Dan.
Yes.
Well, Don, I have a couple of points to make. I actually have an article that I wrote today, and I make the argument that traditional marriage, it's not just a religious institution, but it's actually the fundamental building block of our society. And I was wondering if you could address that. And another thing I want to address, especially going back to children, we have what I consider an epidemic today of children that are being forced to choose identities. And in this particular case, a couple, and we're seeing this not only with homosexual couples, we're also seeing this with some heterosexual couples, that all of a sudden, because, little Johnny picks up a Barbie doll, all of a sudden this child is a female. So they start, trying to transform this child into a female with hormone therapy and what have you. And I think that there's no other way to describe that. It's just plain child abuse. And so I was wondering if you could address that as well.
Thank you very much, Dan, for the questions. I agree with you. Throughout history, man-woman marriage has always been the absolute foundation of society, the very fabric of society. And there's nothing that has ever been able to compare in stability and security to raise children in than man-woman marriage. And if you look at, if you were to even look at it just look at the Hebrew scriptures, if you were to even look at there, you will not see the term homosexuality used. You will see the term male and female used. And when it comes to certain Greek cultures, Roman cultures, and so forth, different civilizations, there are, very remote tribes in certain parts of the world where there is homosexual sex that goes on. Usually it's an older man with a boy that's under 18 years of age, and it's a form of grooming, and it's it's a form of slavery. To me, it's slavery. But that child is used by the adult for the pleasure of the adult. And then, if you look at regular society, if we had a society that was based on sexual preferences of adults and children, our whole society would fall apart. So that's the first point I want to make. When it comes to identities in children, first of all, I don't believe in naming a child's gender identity or sexuality outside of male or female. And as well, I believe that we are all made with a heterosexual template. Anatomically speaking, and in every other way, we are designed in such a way that we're like puzzle pieces, male and female. I'm not going to get graphic here because there may be some children in the audience. However, when it comes to children that struggle with gender identity issues and with their sexuality, first of all, I have looked at that area because I am a child, because of my environment that grew up, where the situation I grew up in, of course, I struggled with my sexuality and my gender identity. When I look at little boys that are wanting to try on mummy's makeup, jewelry, mummy's perfume, mummy's dresses, and they're 2 and 3 years of age, they're definitely struggling with their gender identity, right? And it's quite noticeable. Now, in some situations, the child may hide it, and only one relative might be aware of it. It might be an auntie or a grandma that's aware of it, and sometimes it's hidden from the parents, and sometimes it is known by the family members. However it's discovered, I think it's very important that child is not shamed, that child is loved. And you have to, because there are some laws now in place in several states that are making it illegal for children and teens to access therapy around changing their sexual orientation and gender identity. I have a problem with that because we're dealing with little children. As soon as a parent discovers their child is struggling in this area, I believe that child should enter some very conservative therapy that will get at the root issues to help that child. They have found through research that over 80% of the children and children as they come in their teens who get therapy early actually outgrow that gender identity confusion that they're going through. 80% success rate. With the 20%, there's a level of resolution that can occur, but not as much success. And part of that is due to the fact if a child or a teenager does not get the therapy and the help that they need, the gender identity issues become more embedded long term. And I know men, it's in 90% of men, about 10% of women who are dealing, in a sense, if you look at who has gender identity disorder or gender identity issues, confusion, it is 10% are women, 90% are men. And I looked into why is it that little boys are struggling in this area, and do you know what it goes back to? It's the first question I answered. The stability of a man-woman marriage household, the family setting. It's so very important that we value fathers present in the home, providing in the home, being there. Their role is crucial. As women, when women are pregnant, they need a very strong sense of security and stability. It is not the time for a woman to be forcing herself to work long hours, overtime, and running around, wearing multiple hats. It is a time when a woman is pregnant that she take care of herself and she have people coming around her and offering support, making meals. Some women end up in the hospital during part or like a part of the pregnancy because of risk factors, however, bed rest. But it's so important around the pregnancy, the birth of the baby, and afterwards that women have support coming from their families and communities. This is crucial because when you look at where does that gender identity confusion come from, in a lot of the cases it comes through severe separation anxiety that happens around birth and in the first number of months for the baby boy. Usually it's a baby boy. And we have a push to say to women, you're not valued in the home, you're not valued as a mother, you're not valued as a wife. That's what our society is telling us. And the reality is you as a woman are extremely valuable as wife and as mother. You are so important to the building strong identity in your children at the get-go. And anyway, so these little boys, how does this happen? When I looked at it and I studied separation anxiety, it's when that infant is crying and crying and crying and mommy is not able to get to the baby, to pick up the baby and comfort the baby. If the mother is not there, the baby will begin to attach to an object. And if the mother still doesn't come, then the object is now become substitute for mommy. And that's why the little baby boy, you'll start to see gender issues in role play and how he's dressing when he's 2 and 3 years of age. Also, if there's a father that is not in the home, this is the boy doesn't have a male to identify with. And so for single moms out there, for broken situations where there are sickness and there's prolonged health conditions, it's so important that family members come around families, especially with babies and young children, to offer as much support and comfort as possible, so that it diminishes the risks for these little children to feel like they're being neglected, that their needs aren't being met. It is not spoiling a child to attend to them when they're crying. That actually creates in them a very secure attachment to their mother and to their father.
Wow.
Well,
wow.
Don, I have a follow-up question, and I want to go back to the fact of where you live in Canada, because what you're talking about today is a very powerful topic. And do you living in Canada, and of course, with the type of laws that they have there, and being being very outspoken like you are on these subjects, do you face any stiff criticism? Do you face any retaliation? Has anybody ever tried to file charges against you or anything like that? Because once again, this is something that here in the United States we can talk about this all day, but to me, for you to be so outspoken like this, it would seem like there's some instances where you could face some repercussions.
Thank you for the question and the sensitivity, Dan. The challenge that I have, you have to look at it this way. I'm a very gentle and very careful person, and I love everybody, no matter what they're struggling with. I just don't believe in labeling children and teen sexuality and gender identity and creating on reality for children. So, but when I get to my own, myself, I have provided testimony in Canada before senators, and it's on the public record with the Senate of Canada, on hate crime legislation, particularly when they were looking at adding sexual orientation as a protected category under the criminal code here. And it went through later on in 2014. It was, not 2014, 2004, hate crime had the added category of sexual orientation. In 2005, Canada legalized same-sex marriage. Well, around that time when it was being talked about in Canada, I provided testimony to every parliamentarian in Canada, and so I have done that. As well, I have provided to a parliamentary committee on age of sexual consent. I've also provided my testimony to 9 U.S. states and the Fifth Circuit, and most recently SCOTUS, which is the highest court in the land in the U.S. And this is addressing marriage and same-sex parenting. So where I'm coming from, I'm very heavily testimony-based in where I have written and what I have spoken to, what I have addressed. I have primarily addressed legislation over the last 11 years. Now, I have been doing more than that. I've addressed sex education, comprehensive sex education, and other areas since the mid-'90s, but it has been for the last 11 years that I have gone national and international. So coming from that perspective, and then also the fact I came out with my book, Out From Under, The Impact of Homosexual Parenting, that is my personal story. And in every case I present to legislators, I say, I don't want to be silenced. I'm a child that grew up in this, and I have a voice. I have every right to speak and write about what I grew up in, what my opinions are, what my beliefs are, what my values are, coming from my background. And so you're right. There are activists that have sent horrendous emails to me that are threatening me as a person, threatening towards my family. I have felt unsafe. There are places where I have spoken and I've needed security and police protection. Whenever I travel, I am never alone. I always have at least one other person with me, whether we're in airports, hotels, anywhere. There are a lot of risks. It is not safe, but I am not like a regular Canadian. First of all, I have this in my background. I grew up under the GLBT umbrella. And I have provided testimony in Canada, the U.S., as well as in other countries, in person and also through writing testimony as far away as Australia. I sent my testimony to Australia when they were looking at marriage equality. And my testimony has gone to Argentina, and I have spoken to leaders, political leaders. These are the top leaders that run Paraguay. And I've been in touch with some other countries around there in South America. So because of that very heavy testimonial base that I have and the experience addressing legislation of all types that connect into children and marriage and family, I think that where I'm coming from, I think some people might be upset with what I'm saying, but they have to understand I do have a strong foundation.
That you do, and it's a telling story. We've been posting links up in the chat room, and again, I'm going to repeat that it is on the show page, so people listening to the podcast can click on the links and go to your website, DawnStefanowicz.org. Please, you got to check it out. You've got to download this book. You have it on Kindle too. I think it's like less than $7 on Kindle. So it's not you're not going to break the bank getting the book. And I'm telling you, I dare you to read this and not cry.
It may not come across the border into Canada, so you're better to buy it, the electronic edition, via Kindle. The reason it may not physically pass across the border is because of our laws. They will hold back materials that they consider to be hate speech. Now, you've read my book. Is there any hate in my book?
Absolutely none.
Right.
Absolutely none. It is completely autobiographical, and there's no, absolutely none I could see.
But in Canada, because of our laws, they are very restrictive on what can come across the border. So if anyone does order my book, I do recommend they get the Kindle version if they live in Canada. And, everyone else, I mean, you have more choice. I'm just not sure, and I cannot guarantee that my book will get across the border. And I apologize. That's not me. That's Canada customs and laws in Canada that are making it extremely difficult to bring materials in.
Yeah, you're governed by the Human Rights Commission. Tell us how that is prohibiting you from allowing you to sell the book across border.
Well, we have Human Rights Tribunal Commission at the federal level, and then in every province and territory, which would be like your U.S. states, we have human rights tribunals and commissions right across the country, which they're like hate crime, like policies using the terms of sexual orientation and gender identity, and it creates unequal protections in law, whereby the named protected groups receive more law enforcement than the non-identified groups. So here in Canada, we have a very heavy hand when it comes to what you are allowed to say, what you're allowed to write, what you're allowed to present in the media, and it's extremely difficult. Basically, our freedoms of speech, press, religion, and association have suffered greatly due to government pressure here. And we could not be having the same debate that you're having in the U.S. right now around same-sex marriage or genderless marriage, which includes, of course, not just same-sex couples, but it can include transsexual couples. I just want you to understand. Because with same-sex marriage, what you have is immediately, if I can kind of backtrack, when we had same-sex marriage legalized in Canada in 2005, parenting was immediately redefined. Canada's gay marriage law, Bill C-38, it included a provision to erase the term natural parent and replace it right across the board with gender-neutral legal parent in federal law, so that now all children only have legal parents as defined by the state. And by illegally erasing biological parenthood in this way, the state is ignoring children's foremost right, their immutable, intrinsic yearning to know and be raised by their own biological parents. You know, we cannot be talking about man-woman marriage, heterosexuality as something natural and normal in Canada, because our speech here is such that if anyone is offended or their feelings are hurt by anything we say or write, they can make a complaint to the Human Rights Commission and tribunals here in Canada. And these organizations are right across Canada, known as HRCs. They are organizations that police speech. They penalize citizens for any expression deemed in opposition to particular sexual behaviors or protected groups identified under sexual orientation. And it takes only one complaint against a person to be brought before the tribunal, costing the defendant tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. And the commissions have the power to enter private residences and remove all items pertinent to an investigation, checking for hate speech. That includes your laptops, your files, your smartphone, and so on. And the plaintiff making the complaint has his legal fees completely paid for by the government. And it's not so for the defendant. Even if the defendant is found innocent, he cannot recover his legal costs. If he's found guilty, he must pay fines to the person or persons who brought forth the complaint. You know, in Canada, at the federal level, our HRC has had a 100% conviction rate over the last 3 decades.
Wow.
So if your beliefs, your values, your political opinions are different from the state's, you risk losing your professional license, your job, your business, and even your children. And we had a situation where the Lev Tahor sect, an ultra-Orthodox Jewish sect, where many of their members who had been involved, they've been involved basically in a bitter custody battle with Child Protection Services. They began leaving Chatham, Ontario for Guatemala in March 2014 to escape prosecution for their religious faith, which conflicted with the province's guidelines for religious education. And of that 200 sect members, only about a half a dozen families remain in Chatham. And this is in Ontario, Canada. So parents, you know, with same-sex marriage, you can expect state interference when it comes to moral values, parenting, and education, not just at school.
Well, Dawn, I want to follow up with this because you're very familiar with the stories that are taking place in the United States involving lawsuits being filed against bakeries and such for refusing, and florists, for refusing to bake a cake for a gay marriage, or for refusing to provide flowers for a gay wedding. And so this brings me, and I specifically want to address this because this is something that could be leading here into the United States. And it's long been that eventually we could see religious institutions be forced, churches be forced into having to do gay marriages. So my question is, are religious institutions such as churches currently being forced to do gay marriages inside a church? Are ministers being forced to do gay marriages in Canada?
It's interesting. First thing, I want to backtrack. When we had same-sex marriage legalized, our marriage commissioners were forced to have to do gay marriages, or they lost their job. Because they're employees of the government. For churches so far in Canada, I don't know of a situation where a church has been in a lawsuit situation where they were forced to do a gay marriage. However, what is happening in Canada right now with churches is that they have been advised by their lawyers and by their denominational heads whether that's within the Catholic Church or the evangelical or Protestant churches, to be very careful what they say during their public services, and to watch for the fact that there could be activists that are seated in the sanctuary or in the place where the service is being performed, and those activists are waiting to hear, and they will be taping, but waiting to hear or see anything that would be considered discriminatory towards same-sex relationships or homosexual sex, or anything that they would consider hurtful to their feelings. And so churches are now extremely politically correct and very, very careful what they are saying. So our freedom of association, our freedom to speak within our own faith communities has been regulated to the point where we've been silenced in this area.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions coming up in the chat room, and let me see if I can pull this one up. Cog wants to know whether or not they can use this interview or your book against you, or does it have to be spoken in public in order for them to legally harass you?
Well, I'm not looking for any complaint right now. I'm an everyday person. I have a family, and I've been doing this for a very long time. I think the challenge that you have is if you don't have, if you haven't been doing what I've been doing, and you're Canadian, you're going to be at very, very high risk, especially if you're a pastor, especially if you run a business. It's not just providing wedding services, but any kind of business, any kind of profession. You are not allowed to follow your conscience rights when it comes to providing goods and services. You must provide without abiding by any of your own personal convictions or conscience rights. You basically don't have conscience rights in Canada.
Wow. Dart is asking, if you're a psychiatrist or a doctor, how do you help your patients if you're going to be restricted? You have someone that is going through a gender identity crisis. How do you then, treat the patient without violating these Human Rights Commission rules?
I would say that, no, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a counselor or a therapist. In Canada, you have to have an actual license to provide counseling, which is at least a master's degree, if not a doctorate. So it is very difficult for physicians, for doctors, counselors, therapists, even ministers that have doctorates, master's degrees in counseling or doctorates, to provide counseling services in any fashion, especially around the area of sexuality and gender identity. And because of that, they have to actually watch out for people that would come in that are basically just trying to get a situation where they can make a complaint, where someone pretends to have, be coming in under, good motives and saying, I struggle in this area, and, how do you advise me? And, so there are plants that we have to watch out for. And so there's a great deal of caution that has to be exercised. I've heard that there are doctors and therapists, counselors in the U.S. that have been brought before their discipline committees and have been, some level of discipline has been advised because of their stand to help support men and women that come to them that are struggling with sexuality and gender identity issues. So it's not just Canada. I mean, it's in the U.S. too. I mean, you may not have the HRC, fining people left, right, and center, but you have extremely painful lawsuits. And when I was looking at, if we backtrack to the bakers, they've been told they have to pay $135,000 for refusing to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. And you know what I did not know about until this article I looked at? The basis that was used by the same-sex couple was a long list of alleged physical, emotional, and mental damages. that they claim they experienced as a result of declines on lawful conduct. This is what they say, and they list out all these hurt feelings, all these symptoms that they experienced. And this is what happens is that when you start protecting certain groups or certain individuals, you based on sexual orientation and gender identity, it creates inequality in the law. So now you'll have certain groups that end up being protected, and other groups are not protected under the law. And this is I'm not a lawyer, but this Baker's decision that just came out is extremely worrying because of the basis. Basically, it's about hurt feelings. It's about hurt feelings. And if you look at Canada right across every province and territory, right across our country here, it just has to be hurt feelings to be the basis of your complaint.
And now, Debbie writes in the chat room that Dr. Keith Abela, who is on Fox News as psychiatrist, he's spoken out against small children transgender acceptance, and he has been harassed and prosecuted for that. Recently, we've had another a bakery. A pastor went in and he videotaped himself doing this, asking the bakery that was run by a same-sex couple to make a cake for him, saying that he objects to same-sex marriage. And he put the video up on YouTube. The couple got really upset, demanded he took it down, which he did, but then they had the audacity to ask the FBI to investigate him and file charges. But he just did this very same thing that same-sex couples have done to Christian bakeries. Does it make sense?
Yes, you're unequally protected, which is apparently isn't that against the 14th Amendment? Am I saying it correctly? You have a law about being equally protected under the law. A statement, and so the challenge you have is all of a sudden you're going to have inequality right across America with same-sex marriage.
You are correct on the 14th Amendment because I've got it right smack in front of me. No state shall make or enforce any law that shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person life, liberty, or property without due process, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws.
Absolutely.
That says it all, but we're not getting equal protection. We have a segment of society, a progressive segment of society, that feels that they are morally and legally superior to the rest of us. So what goes for them is perfectly fine, but it doesn't apply to us.
Right. So what happens with this is people have to wake up and realize you legalize same-sex marriage. If you bring in, under your state religious freedom restoration acts, anything to do with gender identity or sexual orientation as protected categories, then you just lost your religious freedoms. Like, you might as well not have written your state religious freedom restoration act because you just lost it. Because, honestly, you can't, because sexual orientation, gender identity in Canada trumps your religious freedom. It trumps any personal autonomy that you have.
Now,
it's like sexual orientation wins out every time, and that's the same thing I'm seeing happen in the States.
Unfortunately,
your conscience rights are being trumped on. Your equality protections are being trumped on. You're losing out if you continue moving down this road. And the left, the progressives use incredibly decent sounding language, but you have to look underneath that language and say, okay, what is this doing to my freedoms? What will this do to my speech? Will I be able to write, say, blog, text on my smartphone? Will I be able to communicate in the press? Will the press even be able to publish what I've written? Or will the radio programs be able to air what I've just said? Or will TV be able to air what I've just said? And so you have to look at that, because in Canada, our Canadian media are restricted by the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, which is the CRTC, and it's similar to the FCC in the States. So if the media air anything considered discriminatory, broadcasting licenses can be revoked, and human rights bodies can charge fines and restrict future airings. That's how bad it is. And so watch what happens with Internet. Watch what happens with your FCC. And if you start to see the fairness doctrine pushed, this whole idea of balance, that is immediately going to shut down your free speech.
Well, Dawn, let me ask you this, because I have a very popular website here in the United States. What is Canada doing right now? And I'm going to use this comparison because we see countries like China, other communist countries that are, Russia, for example, restricting Internet access to certain websites that they deem, of course, would give too much information to the people. Are you seeing any instances in Canada, for example, where we're seeing restrictions to certain websites that they might deem as hate speech?
Right now, everyone's using Google, and if it's happening, if any kind of censorship is happening, I don't know about it right this moment, but I do know when there have been human rights complaints, and we had a website shut down called Free Dominion, which was pretty well one of our only blogging websites where you could actually go on, leave comments, and you could be dialoguing back and forth about all the various issues, whether they were politically correct or not. And so the whole idea was to have free speech and be able to blog back and forth, say whatever you want, and so on. Well, that was basically, that website was shut down, and the people that ran that were charged Human Rights Commission fines, but they ended up going to the court, the highest court they could go to, and after I don't know how many years had transpired, even though the court decision came back and said, you won, you have your freedom. No, they don't have their freedom because the HRC shut them down. They were fined. They've spent several $100,000 in legal fees. No, there's been no blogging for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years since that was shut down. So what I'm trying to tell you is that if you have $500,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 to spend on legal fees to go to the highest court in the land, great. If you can do that, you want to wait 5 years, 6 years to see what kind of decision comes down. But to me, that's not freedom of speech. We don't have any freedom in Canada to just go ahead and blog openly. We don't have that freedom. The one blog that we had, had to be shut down by the HRCs. And so we have these really interesting decisions that will come down from the federal level and will seem very optimistic or positive. Meanwhile, the damage has been done. Everyone has learned, hey, I don't have $200,000 to fight this. I'm just going to shut up. I'm not going to blog. I'm not going to text. I can't afford a fine. I can't afford to be shut down. And, we've had a pastor have his speech shut down out west. We've had Bill Watcott, a case of Bill Watcott, where he was arrested for hate speech in April 2014 for distributing pamphlets that were critical of homosexuality. But, if you knew his background, that he himself is a nurse that worked with people from all different backgrounds, including people with AIDS. He understood because he was directly involved in the gay community himself, and he understood the diseases and the risks, and he knew that the doctors across Canada couldn't distribute pamphlets on the risk factors associated with certain sexual practices, i.e. sodomy, So he came up with his own set of pamphlets, and they are not nice to look at. I mean, they show anal warts and so forth, different types of skin conditions. I have to say this. There was a doctor, he is no longer alive, Dr. LaFrance, provided testimony back in 2004. While I was there, the day I was there, at the Senate of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, and one of those concerns he had as a physician, as a specialist as a dermatologist, he said, will I be able to distribute pamphlets in my office that show the risk factors associated with sodomy? And he said, I feel that if sexual orientation becomes a protected category under a criminal code, like under hate crime legislation, I will not be able to warn my own patients that are part of my caseload about the risk factors associated with certain sexual practices, whether they're men or women that want to practice sodomy. And so that was his concern. Well, here's Bill Watcott. He's not a doctor, but a nursing background, having distributed these kinds of pamphlets and warning people about the risk factors. And he's the one that gets arrested for hate speech in April 2014.
Well,
so I'm just sharing, even physicians, counselors, therapists, social workers, anyone that is dealing with mental health, physical health issues related to sexuality is going to be restricted in providing proper care and services to all groups. And one of the biggest complaints you will hear from the LGBT community is that they don't feel that they're getting the health care that they need. They're afraid to go to the physician. They're afraid to sit down and say, guess what? I'm in a same-sex relationship, or I'm same-sex involved, or whatever. And I need to know about my health, and I need to be, tested for particular diseases or whatever, because I was involved in prostitution, or whatever. For a person within the LGBT community to be told by a physician, basically treated like everybody else, but not given the proper material, the proper pamphlets, the proper literature that they need to protect themselves and to address their particular health risks and health challenges, to me, is discriminatory towards the LGBT community, because then they're not getting the health care that they need. I think that physicians, therapists, counselors, anyone who has any kind of responsibility in providing any kind of services to the LGBT community, it may be they may have 2 patients in their caseload, they may have 80. My father had a physician that he saw that dealt particularly with gay men in downtown Toronto, and he was a specialist. He knew what to look for, and he is the one that helped my father when he was dealing with his health issues. A doctor, a physician, a social worker, a counselor, a therapist needs to have the freedom to be able to provide all the material that is needed to address a patient's, lifestyle needs, relationships, and their sexuality. And, why withhold very valuable information that could warn, that could say, there's risk factors if you do this particular sexual practice. I mean, we have a whole bunch of young people. We even have adults that are in their 40s and 50s with head and throat cancers because nobody told our generation that if you're involved in oral sex, you're going to have be at high risk for particular brain and throat cancers. Nobody told us this.
Wow.
Our generation was never told that. And so you have a whole bunch of children and teens in our school systems right across North America that are being told you can be involved in all of these sexual practices and they're all equal to heterosexual sex in marriage, but, the kids are being told they don't have to be married, they can be sexually active, just make a plan and go by your feelings. Oh, and here's a condom, and here's this and that. Well, majority of people don't use any kind of protection, and even if they do, it's not going to provide 100% protection. I mean, how many children are conceived in heterosexual marriage, and there was contraception involved, and it was faithfully used, children were still conceived. And we're outside of that kind of committed covenant type relationship that marriage provides. Outside of that, when young people are sexually active or encouraged to be sexually active, there's not going to be anywhere near the use of any kind of contraception. But yet kids are told they can do this. They're not told the risk factors. They're not told this will change your life forever. My father died of HIV/AIDS. He was never told that he was at high risk by any of his physicians. But his one physician that he saw that was a specialist in this area that cared for gay men downtown Toronto and area, he knew, he did blood tests. I actually had to see that physician because during my mid-teens I became quite ill over 2 years. My immunity system became quite depressed, and I was going through one infection after another infection after another infection. My father did not take me to the regular family physician that I was used to going to. He took me down to the physician that dealt with gay men because he was concerned that I had somehow been exposed to pathogens growing up in my environment, which I was. However, it was, for me personally, and you have to imagine, I've been married over 30 years and I have children that are now in their late teens. When I went to my physician 3-4 years ago and I told him my situation that I grew up in, I actually kept it as a secret. It's like a man or woman being involved in gay relationships, but they keep it as a secret from their physician. Well, I kept a big secret from my doctor. I said, I didn't tell him what environment I grew up in. As soon as I told him the environment I grew up in from infancy, he immediately sent me for a whole set of blood tests looking for pathogens that one would be exposed to if they're involved in same-sex relationships or they're a prostitute. So I went through all these blood tests, and what came back was I was exposed, in the plural, to pathogens growing up in my environment, and it's because I have the antibodies to prove it. And this is never discussed, that children are going to be at much higher risk if they grow up in a situation where their parent has multiple sexual partners.
Wow.
It blows your mind away. It really does. And, there's so many questions to go there. And, gay couples that are raising children, and as you say, multiple partners, everyone thinks about the adults, what the adult's desire is. No one considers the welfare of the child. It's their right to adopt. It's their right to have that child. Well, what about the right of the child to live in a healthy environment and grow up normally?
Yes, well, and the thing is, I loved my dad, but, what I couldn't comprehend as a child was I couldn't comprehend the instability and how that impacted me. I couldn't comprehend the sexual practices. And they were all different types. I mean, I don't know your listening audience, but I mean, there was everything from group sex with a dozen people to S&M to nudity to, you could keep on going. There was cross-dressing. There was a whole bunch of areas. And so when I looked at, what do you call it, LGBT or GLBT, or you add a whole bunch of letters after that, I looked at it this way, that one individual like my father could have carried on with 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 labels, and they would all be considered, under the term sexual orientation. I might have slipped one of them or two of them could have slipped under gender identity, and he would be totally protected in law. But would he get the kind of care that he needed from physicians, from counselors, from therapists? And why I bring this up is because when my dad went to see a psychiatrist, and I was, coming into my teens, he had seen this psychiatrist for a number of years by the time I found out about it. That psychiatrist had actually been advising my father to explore his sexuality. Now, Annie, you read it in my book. You came across that section in the book about my dad going to the psychiatrist, and he was one of those very open-minded ones, you know. And go ahead, go explore your sexuality. But he never told my dad the risk factors. He never told him that all these men would die. My dad would die, and all these men he was involved with would die. He didn't mention anything about when you have different partners that, you know, you're at a higher risk of suicidal ideation. This psychiatrist just encouraged my dad to walk down the road he was walking. There was no roadblocks or caution signs. And I just really think that's not good.
No, it's
not good. It's the same thing that our schools in public education, when they're presenting this idea that you can explore your sexuality and take on whatever sexual orientation you feel or gender identity you feel, you know, you're not being honest with children and teens and saying, hey, look at this generation of men that died. They were sons. They were brothers. They were uncles, and sometimes, rarely, but they were fathers. Look at this whole generation of men that died in the 80s, 90s. They're all gone. And there's no warning. There's no warning to the kids to say, hey, let's look at history. Let's look at our recent history. And we want you to know, if you're going to honor the men that have been lost and the women that have been lost, be honest about it. Be honest.
Yeah, that's the big problem. And I remember when they started up sex education, and originally it was to be teaching you, it wasn't sex, it was called health education. And they were supposed to be teaching you about, you know, diseases, the anatomy, things like that. It didn't have this heavy sexual context to it that it has today. There's a school in New Jersey, article that hit the newspaper just last week. The school in New Jersey was teaching to 5 and 6 years old about transgender. There's another teacher at 5 and 6 years old teaching about respecting the rainbow. 5 and 6 years old, please. And you do have a compliment up in the chat room. Debbie says that you are a strong woman to have overcome this and be in a healthy relationship for all this time. And God bless you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I do have a very strong faith in Christ, and I was not force-fed about Christ. There's no one that propagandized me into Christ. I have a personal relationship with Christ, and that happened, interesting way, even as a little child, where Christ reached me as a little child, even in the midst of a very dark place where so much weird stuff is going on around me. And Christ is faithful to not only be with us through the dark times that are very confusing as a little child, but he's also there to bring us out. And he brought me out by, first of all, facing the reality of what I'd grown up in, forgiving anyone and everyone who had hurt me. And I also had to forgive myself because I didn't always respond appropriately because I was immature. I was still a child. I was still a teenager. I didn't know how to respond to my dad and his own confusion and his relationships. And I also had to, as I moved ahead, I had to make the best decisions possible. And, if I can add this, in Ontario, Canada, we have a new sex education that's coming down fall 2015. And here's some excerpts from the curriculum beginning in grade 1. They're going to be specifically talking about all the sexual body parts. By grade 3, they're going to be dealing with gender identity and talking about that as a social construct, not as male and female. They're going to be also talking about homosexuality in grade 3 and normalizing it as including homosexual family structures and homosexual marriage. In grade 4, they're going to be bringing in romantic dating, and they're going to be bringing in masturbation in grade 6, anal intercourse and oral sex in grade 7, and grade 8, how to make a personal plan about your sexual activity. Now, underlying all of this, what's really weird about this, and parents are just up in arms about all of what I just said, but they're also up in arms with the fact that throughout, it's teaching the child that they can consent to sex with another person. And, if you visit my website, I have a bunch of resources under children and schools, and there is a man that was behind the design of this Ontario sex education curriculum, and he's been charged with carrying child pornography and promoting the sexual abuse of a child. And so he's been charged, and I think he's only going to get a few years in prison. I think 3 years in prison for this.
But they're going to use his material.
Absolutely. And we have a lesbian premier who heads our province. She used to be the Minister of Education. She's now running the province. And she is radical. She is not listening to the parents. Now, remember, because of same-sex marriage, we're now just legal parents, which means the state can dictate to the parents what will be taught in schools, not the other way around, even though we as parents are supposed to have the right to educate our children. So there's a conflict going on right now in the province of Ontario, and there's been a march of about 5,000 parents recently in the last several weeks. And our premier is not listening to the parents right now. And unless there's a constitutional challenge, which I doubt there will be, unless there's a group that's willing to go, and I have heard rumors, I have seen one statement of an organization promising a constitutional challenge, but I haven't known of it actually happening. If without a constitutional challenge, this sex ed is coming in September 2015.
2015. Dan, we've got a great question in the chat room. Debbie's asking, is homeschooling allowed in Canada?
Homeschooling is. It depends what province you're in. And anyone who belongs to Homeschooling Legal Defense Association, it's in Canada and it's in the States, I recommend, whether you are religious or not religious, it doesn't matter, join HSLDA, because homeschooling families are going to be at higher risk of surveillance and supervision.
And what was that link?
Wow.
HSLDA, Homeschooling Legal Defense Association. It's an excellent group. Not only do they help in Canada and the United States, they help internationally.
Well, I'm putting a link up in the chat room because I just found the website. It's hslda.org, if I can hit the right key.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
But Dan, you homeschool, so you better check this out.
Yeah, and Dawn, I want to make this point, and I would like for your comment on it, because you were just talking about this new sex curriculum that's going to be coming down. I have seen, and it's my personal opinion, that these type of programs are normalizing pedophilia, and it's almost like it's encouraging our children to become. It is. It's encouraging our children to become sexually active, to grow up before they should, and this exposes them, coming to my point about pedophilia, this exposes them to be victims of sex crimes and put in situations that children should not be put into.
Can I say this, Dan? I appreciate your comment that you just made, and I absolutely agree with you. The problem we have with this Ontario sex ed curriculum, which is coming down, this fall, 2015, is that it absolutely is opposed to our age of sexual consent, which is age 16. This curriculum is encouraging children, beginning in grade 1, to learn how to give sexual consent, to have sex. And how can a child, even at age 16, let alone a 6-year-old, understand the ramifications long-term of sexual activity, whether that's with a child or children or adults? Like, this is totally sick. We are steaming angry up here And our liberal Wynne government here can't see it. She's a lesbian herself. She brought in her lesbian partner into her home, her husband and her, even though they divorced, they all lived in the same home. But Wynne brought in her female partner to live in the home, and I don't know if the husband lived in, the ex-husband lived in the basement. Well, their kids lived in the house, and they were so distraught over what was happening in their situation. They were absolutely so distraught. And so I guess she didn't learn from her own experience with her own kids. She's not listening to her own kids and say, hey, this hurt me, all right? She hasn't learned anything. She's now promoting this to all of the children for the province. And not only that, we had an equity and inclusive education strategy that was just brought in the last several years. And in that, we have the Human Rights Commissions, which I talked about a while back in the first hour, and here in the second hour. Well, guess what? The Human Rights Commissions totally permeate and surround our education curriculum and programming, the whole education strategy. I read the 120-plus page document, guidelines of implementation of this education strategy, and I was totally shocked that our children, not only with this sex education curriculum, which was pulled originally in 2010 and it's been basically reintroduced to come into effect within 4 or 5 months, what is so interesting about this is the children are not only going to be taught how to provide sexual consent, they're also being taught how to police for bullying. And there's a term that's used which is called a school climate. I'm mentioning this because some very aware individuals or groups may be listening to this interview. But the school climate doesn't just exist in the building and the land of the school. It actually travels with the child. It's a special term. So wherever your child goes, whether that's to the corner store for lunch or the cafeteria in the school, or the child goes out on the bus and goes home, and with their laptops and smartphones, cell phones, whatever communication devices they carry with them, all of that is included in the school climate. So that means now your home environment, wherever your child goes, even if it's to the mall to meet friends from school, even into the faith community, if you go to church on Sunday, your child, the school climate travels with your child even to the church. So now your child is being trained to police speech in all environments that the child is in, which means there is a possibility that when the child comes to the classroom and talks about his personal beliefs, opinions, and values, which are in conflict with the state and the public education, that the parents may be questioned and an investigation begin into the family of that child, because the family's values, beliefs, and opinions do not agree with the state's. And why I bring this up, because the Human Rights Commissions surround and permeate our education strategy, our Ministry of Education, anything and everything that's under that. And that means that if there's no protection for religious freedom in our HRC, there's no protection for your beliefs or your opinions. They're not 100% protected, and because of that, it puts children and parents at risk, and especially the fact that parents are considered legal parents, which means the state can come in and usurp parental rights, because now it's only a privilege to be a parent because you're just a legal parent. So you have to look at this as, because I provided testimony in so many different areas, I started with sex education because back in the 90s, they were trying to bring in a curriculum about homosexuality. Even if it was a section, they wanted to bring it into grade 7 and grade 8 and grade 9, and parents were up in arms about it. But now there's absolutely no choice. Now they're pushing it down, they want to push it down the throat of 6-year-olds.
It's absolutely
beginning
amazing.
At 6.
It's
Yes.
worse. Moving made a comment in the chat room, and I'm just going to paraphrase it. It's actually worse than the Hitler Youth. You know, your child now becomes the rat for the state, and God forbid, and a 5 or 6-year-old, is always going to disagree. No, I want this now. I want to do that now. The school said I can do this, so who are you to tell me I can't do it? And that's the attitude they're going to be teaching our children.
Well, we can't even as parents just enter our child's high school because we want to. We have to go to the principal's office. We cannot even go to our children's classroom in the high schools. You have to go to the principal's office first. You need permission. You can't, and they usually won't allow you to go to your child's classroom.
You know, they are also doing the same thing here, unfortunately, in the United States. You know, any school you enter, you have to go to the main office first to sign in, and then they check to make sure you're allowed to be there. And if your teacher doesn't like you, then bye, you're out of here. Holy cow! This is. Go ahead.
It's scary. Now, I know there's, always one or two really bad situations, and that's why they have that in place. However, as parents are the ones that should have the absolute right when it comes to education of our children. I mean, I had a situation with my son. He was being bullied in the classroom by the teacher and by the other students. And the teacher was actually encouraging this based on your political beliefs, your political opinions. And the teacher was bringing up issues like same-sex marriage, like abortion, going through all those areas that are, even for adults, extremely complicated, very complicated for adults even to deal with, let alone, teenagers in grade 10. And anyway, so this was a civics class, and my son was basically being bullied to the point that he was considered, the most conservative of all the kids in the classroom, and the bullying that was going on. So I had to come into the school, and I had a lawyer's letter with me. And I came into school, and I said, I want to be there when my son makes that 1-hour presentation because of what is going on, what's going on in the classroom. Well, of course, do you know what they did? They said, okay, how they got the situation resolved. They said to my son, you don't have to do your 1-hour presentation. But meanwhile, I caused a whole uproar in the school because the union got involved in everything to protect the teacher. But that teacher was bullying my son. That teacher was creating an environment where my son was being ostracized. My son was being put up against the wall, basically for his beliefs, his opinions, his values. And that's where this goes, is if the state's in control of education and not the parents, then the state can bully your child.
And that's absolutely amazing. I don't have children, unfortunately. I wasn't blessed. But Dan homeschools his, and Moving is saying that he's going to be praying for you and for your family. A lot of prayers are going to be going out for you. You are an extremely, extremely brave woman. And I'm telling everyone, they've got to read your book. Go to DawnStefanowicz.org. We've been putting it up in the chat room. It's also up on the show page. So if you're listening to the podcast, check it out. If you're listening live here now, please check it out. If anyone wants to call in and ask their questions directly, the call-in number is 917-889-3675. From everything that you went through, normally people would think that you would be cowed, you would duck your head, you would say, all right, fine, I got out of it, I survived, that's it, now leave me alone. But you haven't done that. You chose to have your voice heard. That had been a hard road for you to get onto. Because as you said,
lonely.
In your book,
I have to tell you, very lonely.
Well, you've got a lot of love and a lot of friends out here.
Well, I'll tell you what it is. If I hadn't have grown up in my situation from infancy under the GLBT umbrella, and we were not dealing with what we're dealing with in our culture right now, that's affecting freedom of speech and freedom of religion, conscience rights, and so on. I wouldn't dare be talking about this. I have no need to talk about it. But I felt compelled when I had presented at the Senate of Legal and Constitutional Affairs back in 2004. I came home and presented to a school board of there were about 600 people in the audience. There were trustees and there were parents and grandparents. And I was interrupted 8 times by the audience. 8 times in my 5-minute time slot that I was given to provide my reasons why I did not want a particular area of sex education being taught at the schools in the city I live in. And because of those interruptions, I went, forget about this. I felt compelled. I have to write my story down because the activists had literally been bussed in to this audience, that surrounded the different people that were giving reasons why they didn't want this brought into the schools, a special type of sex education curriculum. And when you saw activists bust in, and the fact they were disrupting, creating all these interruptions so that if anyone said anything conservative or anyone said anything that was speaking about man-woman marriage or protecting children, keeping kids safe, anything like that involved values and beliefs and opinions that were conservative, and you were disruptive. Well, I thought if I get my book in print, then it can go places, and that's what I did. I came home. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any way this was going to happen. I penned everything down on paper, and it was a long process, took several years, and then it was published, and I published in the States because, first of all, it has a much wider distribution route. You have great distribution for materials. Number 2, you don't have hate crime legislation that bans books at the border and DVDs and so on. You still have a level of freedom of speech that Canada has lost. You still have that freedom. And so hold on to your freedom and hold on no matter what. And I don't know what's going to come down with the same-sex marriage decision. About 80%, I think there's about an 80% chance that it's going to go in a direction that's going to restrict freedoms. But there's a 20% chance that decision, somehow they will make a decision that says, the states, it's up to each state to make their own decision about marriage. And if they come out with that decision, then that'll be a day that won for freedom. If they come out with the decision that same-sex marriage has now been legalized, you will have every type of marriage legalized, and you will lose your freedoms. But America has to stand up. America has to blog, talk, text, do everything you can possibly do and make sure that what happens in D.C. and what happens in each of your capital cities, that you are there and your voices are heard. And, I support America. I have relatives in America. I love America, and I love freedom. Thank you very much for having me on this program today, and I hope that that many people understand their precious freedoms and how to hold on to them dearly.
That's a huge amen to that. And I tell you, you have to pick up this book. You've got to read it. It's Stefanowicz.org. You can get the book at, and it's called Out From Under. And it's an amazing, amazing story. And what you have told us here is a complete eye-opener. We are having the LGBT battle, between those of us that are conservative and their community. They're only 10% of our population, and yet they're affecting 90% of what we do every day. And that's a little lopsided. It's the minority.
It's actually 2 to 4%. It's not at 10%. That's one of the myths that they've pushed out there. And I don't want to offend you, Annie, but I just want to say, just to correct you, I've been in this area for so long, and at a conservative figure of about 2%. If you include people who say they're bisexual, you're around 4% of the population. But it's only a fraction of that 4%, a tiny little fraction that is the lobbying group. And that lobbying group is so well funded. I won't name names, but there are some billionaires out there that are funding the LGBT movement, the GLBT movement, to bring in state-like restrictions around all of your amendment freedoms.
Well, don't be. If I'm wrong, please correct me. I ask you to. I have no ego.
Well, I did.
I have no ego, and Dan knows that. It's like, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Dawn, I have a quick question. I wonder if you could comment on this. We have a lot of people on what we would call the liberal left, Democrats, progressives, whatever, that are calling the gay rights movement in the United States the new civil rights movement of our generation. I was wondering if you could comment to that.
Well, first of all, I look at race as something that cannot be changed. I mean, whatever color your skin is, whatever ethnicity you have, that's part of your heritage. That's part of your history. Children need to be connected to their heritage, their history. If they're Native Americans, if they're Black Americans, if they're Hispanic Americans, they need to be connected to their history. Why is that so important? Children need to know where their past comes from. They need to know their religious background. They need to know their ancestors. They need to be connected to their blood relatives, the good and the bad. We all have, black sheep in the family. Listen, it's okay that the kids know there's some black sheep in the family. At the same time, when you use the civil rights movement, and I'm not black, I'm white, but when you use the civil rights arguments, you have to understand that sexual orientation and gender identity are not equivalent. Why? Because they change. Sexuality changes your sense of what your gender you are. Men and women that struggle with their gender can change. They can actually become more heterosexual in their gender identity. In race, you cannot change your color of your skin. You cannot change your ancestry. You cannot change your heritage. So I think that it is wrong that the civil rights movement from the 60s has been hijacked by the GLBT, LGBT lobby groups. But I also think it's wrong that many people who struggle with their sexuality and gender identity have been hijacked. Their feelings, their thoughts, their struggles have been hijacked for an ultimate goal having to do with state control. And if the civil rights movement brought in freedom, the GLBT, LGBT lobby groups, whether they realize it or not, are bringing in state control, which is the opposite. And so, do you want freedom or do you want state control?
Man, you are a powerful, powerful woman, Dawn. Can you come here and run for president?
I'm not naturally born. I'm not a naturally born American.
Oh, you can always do
even
though the
current president, I think it's quite doubtful that he is naturally born, but I won't go there.
Dawn, it has been a fascinating interview with you, and I welcome you back anytime. If you got something coming up, you've got my number. Just call me and let me know, and we'll get you back on here ASAP.
Annie and Dan, thank you very much, and I pray that everything that is meant, that is good for America happens, and that freedom reigns. Freedom reigns.
Amen to that. Dawn, God bless you.
Yes.
And thank you for doing the fight and alerting us to all the issues that, a lot of us aren't even aware of. We only see it peripherally, but you delve into the heart of it, and thank you so much for the work you do.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless, Dawn. Thank you. Man,
Thank
Dawn
you, Dawn
Stefanowicz, please check out her website, dawnstefanowicz.org. check out her book called Out from Under. It's up on Amazon. I downloaded the Kindle. Please get her book. And thank you. It's been a wonderful, wonderful show. We will be back on our normal time on Tuesday, and we've got Randy Sutton coming back. So we're going to have some great shows lined up. So I want to say thank you for everyone listening in that are also up in the chat room and listening in on the phone as well as online. And I'll say good night and God bless.
If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan. Health care plan. Health care plan. Those who vote the wrong way. Welcome to the place. Welcome to the place of the left hypocrisy. Little pink outfit for you and me. Oh, welcome to the place. Welcome to the face of the new democracy. Here in the land of the not so free.
This is the most transparent administration in history. Not even a smidgen of corruption.
Fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. What difference at this point does it make?
If you've got a business, you didn't build that.
for a period of time.
I'm not interested in
I used to do that.
Photo ops.
I got to end the show. I'll talk to you later, Dawn, or Dan, if you can hear me.